Hello, everyone. This is Leilani Cawthon, the CEO of the Learning Council, or a publisher and news media organization who does a lot of research in the K-12 industry. We have with us today for this particular event, Deploying Distance Learning Solutions for Access Equity, 2 New Ways. We have with us Robert Werhanowicz. Nice having you. We're huge fans, as you know, Buckeye Union High School District, one of our all-time favorites. And we also have with us Randy Phelps, who's the CTO from Eastside Union High School District. I'm going to call on Erik Heinrich to say hi. He's with CommScope, who's also with us today.
Good morning, Leilani. Thank you for having us this morning.
CommScope was kind enough to underwrite this particular event and has some exciting things to share with us today. So we want to get started with that message, particularly from Erik. But before we do, the discussion today is going to be about really what's happening out there in the field in K-12 schools and districts as we went into quarantine, and now with the worries about what's going to happen this fall. Obviously, every single school district in America is really worried about what's it going to look like? How's this going to work? And are they going to be able to have all the kids on campus on the same time as they used to? Or are they going to have to go to different schedules? And there's other scares happening in the market. And then we're going to talk about the evolving scale of digital equity, what that really looks like. There's been some innovative work done with CommScope in the past couple of years that we really want to reintroduce because the market's been changing so rapidly. And then we're going to go to our panelists and talk to them about what they've really been doing and really what they've seen happen in their own field. And then we'll go to open Q&A. So the first thing I want to tell you is that there's complications now in the market that are beyond just what was happening with quarantines and what will happen with social distancing to change schedules, how many kids you can have in a classroom, how many kids maybe are still at home if you're going to separate days. Some of the things that are happening is that schools are seeing a possible loss of enrollment going into fall. There's been a lot of national polls on the consumer side talking about parents saying they just don't want to come back. They've been exposed to homeschooling, maybe in a good way, maybe in a not so good way. They're shopping alternatives. And some of the districts are starting to freak out about that, which is really a reason to upgrade and look at how exactly you're addressing equity. Because if you haven't done a good job of it, it may be a reason for parents to say, I'm out. And then there's other things happening with regards to kids being disengaged because their access just isn't that great. And if it's not a great experience, then they're looking at what you're doing with distance learning in your schools and districts is not very favorable. So that uncertainty and rising inequity, we've been seeing it all over. We do tabulate kind of what we have happening out there in the field, and we're looking at those sort of conditions as one of the reasons why you really need to look at all the flavors of what you can do to address equity. Literally every webinar that the Learning Council has done since late March has really shown that this issue of internet access is #1 for school districts across the country. So the other thing that we've seen happen is we did a survey on the 13th of May. We had 18,631 respondents, and the K-12 purchase interest is so off the charts for what is going to happen with especially the software side, that what will happen in the fall to hit your networks will be something you've never seen before. The software purchase across the market is a boom town. We have a lot of companies telling us they've picked up 1 million seats here, 1 million seats there. One company told us they sold more digital curriculum in one day after quarantine started than they had sold all last year. This is no joke. And so what you have that maybe worked in the past is not going to continue working. So the evolving scale of digital equity, and then I'm going to wrap Erik back into this, started with looking at where we were originally in phase 1. People were doing campus networks and then going to a teacher-centric network, classroom more specific, so you made sure you had access, and then up to these other phases. And this scale really tells you a lot about where you have to go right now. So I want to wrap Erik in and have him talk about this evolving scale of digital equity and then continue on with really what CommScope is doing. Erik?
Yeah, thanks, Leilani. I'm going to start this by saying that without being insensitive, I've been talking about how perhaps this pandemic is not the virus we deserved, but maybe the catalyst we needed to really, as a nation, really look at this challenge of digital inequity. Right? We've been talking about this, as you've seen here on this infographic that was created, now over a year ago, and we updated this. This is something that's been around. So most of you who are participating in schools, I served 7 years with the San Francisco Unified School District before I joined CommScope. So this is not an entirely new topic for me, something that I've been passionate about for years, but this just proves the point that this has been around. But what we are seeing is a rapid acceleration in moving through these phases. As you can see, when the survey was performed, more than half, the majority of schools were at about phase 3, which was ensuring that students on campus were connected and having access in various parts of the campus for digital access to digital curriculum. That is supported by E-rate, right? So if you participate in E-rate, which most schools do, you're probably pretty familiar with the fact that they're really looking to cover school campuses and those school facilities. The reality we've been exposed to today really shows what phase 4 is going to bring us, right? What is beyond the walls of that campus. So, we're really seeing an acceleration of this. And while, the current impacts are tremendous on individuals and families, so I want to be sensitive to that. Looking for a positive note, I'm feeling positive that there's been so much more attention placed on this critical issue of making sure that everyone has access and the support they need to get that access, that I think we're going to wind up in a better place ultimately.
There's a lot more to this. The equity issue has new permutations into other dimensions of inequity, and it's particularly now politically so apparent that there has to be more done. We'll have people bring up questions. I know Brendan Tanner, you're on the line. I'm not going to unmute you just yet, but I get where you're going with your questions, and we'll come back to those in a little bit, because certainly there's something to address there. So in terms of that evolving scale of digital equity, and then Erik, I want you to take it from there. The 4 areas are those in that community-centric sub-areas in that of those 4 areas. And Erik, we want to kind of blow those up. If you could talk about those, that's really what we really wanted to have this particular webinar about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So well over 50% of respondents to the survey, which means schools, are suggesting that they are only at phase 3. And again, that was limited to the grounds of the campus. But what we're seeing is that learning doesn't stop on campus, right? Learning takes place now at home. It takes place everywhere. I mean, it actually has been taking place everywhere. Now we're just seeing an absolute critical need to be able to support that, because the schools were closed. It was no longer even an option. So driving that benefit outside of the campus, we're starting to see some different approaches at how schools are tackling that. The first and foremost one is outdoors, the parking lot. This was kind of a logical extension of what schools were already doing. The FCC and USAC relaxed their E-rate rules to allow greater access and greater usage of the E-rate funded internet service on school campuses out into the parking lots. This was previously an ineligible use of E-rate funded internet access. You weren't supposed to allow the community to use your access outside on the campus. It was specifically meant for use in instructional areas or instructional facilities, and only for instructional purposes of students, right? But what was allowed under the relaxed E-rate rules was to allow people to drive up into the parking lot, allow the community to use it, allow students and families to pull up in the parking lot and use that. So this meant we've seen schools deploying Wi-Fi in areas of the campus that they maybe haven't had it previously. We've seen it not only in parking lots, but also in athletic facility grounds that may be adjacent to the school campus, right? But still technically part of that campus. So if the weather permits, there were students spread out all along the bleachers of stadiums, right? Which I think is a fantastic use, because it is getting people outside. There's room, there's fresh air. This is part of the approach that schools are taking in dealing with physical distancing, is to really take better advantage of outdoor space, allow for outdoor learning. And that's an international approach that we've seen beyond just here in the US is that schools dealing with this limited physical space for physical distancing are really going to have to take advantage of that outdoor space. Beyond that, some interesting things. Student hotspots, right? That's an easy one that I think a lot of people jump to. We're going to give kids a MiFi and they're going to take it home and they're going to get connected. First of all, that assumes that they have a device, right? So there have been a number of large one-to-one deployments. Those shared carts of Chromebooks, you're probably going to have to figure out what to do with those because CDC is recommending not sharing devices or limiting access to shared materials and tools in campuses and schools so that we're not passing that around. So student hotspots were a way to enable connectivity in the home, connectivity off campus in general. There are some pros and cons with all solutions. It can be, the costs of that can be cost prohibitive over time. There are potentially issues now if there's a high density of users in a particular neighborhood or building, all connecting to the same cell tower, right? Cell towers are always oversubscribed. In other words, the capacity of that cell tower typically is less than having every single person using it all the time, which is why if there's an earthquake, it may be hard to get a phone call out on your cell phone. You can maybe text something out and get a little bit of data, but for voice call, that takes a lot more, and that cell tower can get overwhelmed. So there's a challenge potentially there with hotspots. But we are seeing the use of cellular backhaul. It's something that you can use in rural areas or low density areas where there aren't too many people who need that additive access. So it's still a very useful tool. School bus Wi-Fi, the idea here is that you can now have a mobile hotspot. You have a vehicle that perhaps during this COVID-19 stay-at-home crisis is not bringing kids to campus. In fact, it may be used to take things from your campus out to your community, like school lunches. Those students can still go to the same bus stop where they would normally get picked up for school, and instead their families can pick up their school lunch, right? So it's a great use of it. But what else can it do? Well, we've been working with school districts that are putting Wi-Fi on the school bus so that they can broadcast Wi-Fi as a hotspot. And along with that, they're using, similar to MiFi technology, we have hardware that uses cellular as the backhaul. So in other words, it connects to the local cellular network. And then through meshing, we have access points connected on the outside of the bus that's broadcasting that service. And this can be used for telehealth. It can be used for educational purposes, right? So there's a number of use cases for a school bus as a mobile hotspot. And finally, in the bottom right quadrant, this is an emerging technology. We have a number of pilots running with schools using private LTE. This is also known as CBRS, the Citizens Broadband Radio Service. It's spectrum that was previously regulated and used only by the US military, the Navy, for ship-to-shore communications during times of war. Now, thankfully, that's never been used because we have not had war vessels communicating with the shore over this private channel here in the United States. We have not had, that sort of conflict where this was needed. So the FCC opened up access to this spectrum, and we're now using this across the US for private LTE. Now, what does LTE offer? Wi-Fi is wonderful. It's unlicensed. It's free. But if you've ever had Wi-Fi in your house and then you've gone outside, you quickly lose that signal. So what do you use? You use cellular, your phone. You can't even see the cell tower that you connect to. It's so far away. Well, we're now using that same LTE technology, that same cell tower-like technology, to be able to provide further coverage with the same benefits that LTE provides, which are things like better voice quality, also greater distance coverage, and also encryption, automatically encrypts those connections. There are a number of benefits of that private LTE. So these are kind of 4 technologies and 4 solutions that we're seeing. In fact, I think it was Castlewood ISD in Texas, they've purchased the 2 local cellular towers from a local carrier, and they themselves are going to become a service provider to their community. So again, that private LTE and Wi-Fi, currently on those towers, they're mounting Wi-Fi, but they're under a pilot with us to mount the private LTE as well. So I believe it's going to become more common, and I think we're going to hear a bit from one of our guest panelists about what that might look like in communities, maybe where you don't own the cell tower, but can work with the local city to really provide access beyond just the school campus grounds. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Leilani.
Great, that's a really good overview. So really the two newest ones in terms of what's happening in the national scene are the school bus deployments and the private LTE. And I know you also mentioned, Eric, check me if I'm wrong on this, that the private LTE helps solve the problems of having 4 or 5 kids in one house all accessing, and then the signals sort of going over each other if you were just doing student hotspots.
Yeah, that's right. So with something like that, what your benefit is that right now when you have a small amount of spectrum and everybody has, say, a MiFi little hotspot in their backpack, that creates a bunch of interference, if you will, right? So just like having too many Wi-Fi routers in the same room creates interference for one another. They're all in that same trying to share that same spectrum and running and bumping up against each other. With private LTE, it's a technology that dedicates certain bandwidth to that endpoint device. We're using also the ability to then extend it with Wi-Fi, right? So these are much more robust. It's like the device you're going to put in your home, just like the carriers provide you with AT&T or Comcast. They provide you a box that then allows you to connect many more devices in your residence, and then backhaul that up to the local LTE service. So in the places where having many dense devices in a small area, CBRS is proving to be a great tool in the toolkit.
That's great. Yeah. And so what you're speaking to when you're talking about that is this next level of equity, which is, equity isn't just having the device. It isn't just having the, regular hotspot or Wi-Fi access. It's really now, in this age, it's getting into those density issues, which is someplace where CommScope really shines. Okay, so I want to come back to our panelists, Robert and Randy. So Robert, let's come back to you first, and everybody can keep sort of a mystery as to which one you are in that picture of Buckeye Union. Buckeye Union was a
right.
winner of our national survey. That's your whole team with your superintendent kneeling in front of you. Really amazing group of people, and I'm a big fan of you all, as you know. So you've done some interesting things in Buckeye Union, which is really located in one of the fastest growing areas in the country, but you still had inequities. So tell us about what you did.
To address the equity issue in particular, we went ahead and procured Wi-Fi hotspots that we have had delivered to us. We set them up with SEPA compliant web filtering, obviously. So that kind of bridged a gap, if you will, on our no internet equity, because we are a full 100% 24/7 one-to-one district. So the students all had devices, and we had to bridge that gap between no internet because we're a rural community. A lot of the students either on farms or ranches or out in the rural areas didn't have internet. So we assessed that and brought probably up to about 99+% of our students online by deploying hotspots, so cellular hotspot, and again, SEPA compliant, and then limited to just internet access for their devices.
And then didn't you guys also do some buses with Wi-Fi?
Yeah, actually we had in place already. We had several buses that we call our trip buses or long run buses, because we have a bus run that drives students over, about an hour one way to school. So we did have Wi-Fi on those originally. So we did deploy those at various locations. We had a limited number, so that didn't really bridge a great gap there, but it did allow the students to go to a location and get internet access if they needed.
That's great. And what are you hearing as feedback? What has there have anybody come forward and said we just don't have access, or people have come forward and said thank you so much, this is awesome? What's happening?
Mostly the latter, just because they didn't have access, and mom's cell phone had limited internet bandwidth or allowances on it, so they were eating up their own bandwidth. So when we provided those devices, it was a big thank you, and of course some of that went unsaid, but we know that the parents appreciate it. We haven't heard back from all of them by any means, but certainly we got the 99% of their students were able to get access, and that was a huge thing for them.
Yeah. Did you see sort of a continuity in operations then when you went into quarantine because of the coverage model?
Meaning, what was
academically?
the question? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, meaning did you see academic?
Yeah, I mean,
we
had deployed Teams, Microsoft Teams previously. So we had all of our class rosters integrated, which was a huge boon for the teachers, because once they logged into Teams and they found that their students were already in Teams, set up by class periods, so algebra, English, science, first period, all those students were already in there. So they being the teachers, had far less transition distance to go to connect with their students. They just opened Teams. They found all their students already pre-populated in there. Surprise to some of them, because some teachers hadn't been using Teams as much as we had hoped or liked. But that allowed them to immediately communicate with their students. And I think because of that kind of innovative pre-planning on the effort of the IT department here was kind of the clincher that saved their day, so to speak, in a large way.
That's great. All right, so I'm going to go to Randy. Randy, let's talk about what you've done, because it's sort of at the top end of the mountain. You know, you've gone all the way to the highest level of creating equity. So tell us kind of the journey and what you did.
Well, our district is about 23,000 kids, and for the most part, our need for resources and opportunities is extremely high. We're on the east side of San Jose. When I first came to the district, I got together with the superintendent and a really creative bond salesman, because we knew that if we didn't have any money, that whatever dreams you might have, we wouldn't be able to achieve them. So we figured out a vehicle that's a near-term tech bond vehicle, which the bond salesman has subsequently registered, which is great to me, because I think everybody should have one of these, where you're not at the mercy of construction budgets and municipal bond funding. And so once we had that, we knew that our kids needed better and more, and it needed to be sustained over a really long period of time, because we didn't necessarily think the economic conditions were going to change. So what we did was we passed a tech bond, and with that, we started pursuing with the city the idea of providing Wi-Fi access for all of our students under our SSID and through our security. But then the part that we put to the city was that they needed to provide access to the community, because we knew our security was only as good as we could protect it, and the best way to protect it was not to put kids in a bind where their parents would be asking for their login and their password, but instead that they would be provided Wi-Fi access of their own, so that they could look for jobs and learn things on YouTube and read the news, that kind of stuff. So we embarked on a project with the city. We looked for a lot of partners, but everybody was afraid to do it. They thought it would be crazy and too hard. And so what we use is municipal buildings, traffic lights, light poles, and we build out to actually where our kids live. It provides a lot of kids with access inside their houses, but it provides about 80% of our kids access if they want to sit on their front porch or sit in their backyard or whatever, which is perfect in the SIP conditions that we're in Santa Clara County. For us, for devices for kids, our policy for the last 6 years has been that if you wanted a device and you needed a device, all you had to do is ask for one and we would provide it for you. And that way, kids who don't want one aren't just issued like the Dave Regier iPad or Chromebook that they don't know why they use it because they don't use it at home. We just ask the kids, if you need it, we'll give it to you. We also applied for a $1 million grant with Sprint when Sprint offered that, and we were lucky enough to get a $2.5 million grant. And we had the option, at least initially, of data bricks, of MiFis, or of phones, and all the other districts that wanted MiFis only, and so that made us step back for a second and think about it. We decided to give our kids phones, and they got a really nice phone which had a data plan, and within about 6 months we got the data plan extended to 10 gigabits per month, so more than enough for the kids who could not get on the city Wi-Fi to be able to use the phones. So we felt pretty well covered. We're still building out, but with the pandemic, it's gotten everyone to the table, because when you look at the cost of trying to buy MiFis, it makes sense like why in Texas they're trying to be their own provider, because the telcos will bleed you dry and you don't end up with anything at the end. So for us, going to Wi-Fi the way that we did, there was benefit to the city in terms of providing for their community, And there was also benefit to the city because they did not know their inventory, nor the power, nor the connections, nor the quality of the fiber in the neighborhoods. And we've helped them learn all that. And then on top of that, we've been able to mitigate some other issues. I've got a meeting next week with one of the commissioners for the FCC to talk about expanding E-rate to allow for this kind of a project, because if E-rate was provided for this, there isn't a town or a city that couldn't benefit from it. A couple of years ago, I helped a small town near here, a local construction company helped me provide the access for the community because they didn't have any Wi-Fi, and I wanted to help them out in a little tiny community. So that's been our solution. It's worked pretty well for us. When we went out in March, we readied Chromebooks, and we were able to distribute about 5,000 Chromebooks within the first 3 days. And we've probably put out about 500 hotspots because we get them through the grant and at a reduced cost. What's nice there in that grant, it's $45 for the brick and 2 years of free data. So there it's economically smart to go that direction while we build out the Wi-Fi. But now the city council is going hard at it, and they're on board. And the latest is we had worked with our county office, and we've got a fiber plant where we built fiber loops through our city to all the local districts. I want to say there's 25 or 30 districts in the San Jose area. We're one of the largest, but we wanted to build some redundancy, and we got a waiver from E-rate for that too, so that tying into the fiber for the Wi-Fi, especially as Wi-Fi 6 comes up, is really going to be critical, because we want to be able to blanket the whole city in Wi-Fi.
That's great. And then what kind of results have you been seeing? I mean, did you guys see, as the quarantines happened, a good amount of continuity of operation for learning, or what happened? What's the feedback?
Even before, so for us, we've been planning kind of not for this, but we've been planning that there would be a shift in a lot of things for kids in terms of really being able to provide for them the time, the 18 hours that they're not at school. So even before we went out, in one community, in one of my high schools, they passed more data than the downtown area that has Wi-Fi and the airport by 5 times in 1 month.
Wow.
So, and what's really neat is the data on this, and I can provide it to Eric or you or whatever, so you can share it. The data is really awesome. It shows you like what time kids get home from school, because you see it start to rocket up, and then you see what time everyone goes to bed too, which is not nearly as late as they tell you in the paper. And our access for the kids, we don't meter them. One of the problems the city ran into in a previous endeavor was that they throttled everybody. And of course, all that did was make everyone have kind of a crummy experience. With us, we unthrottled it, and our usage rockets because people actually get good access. And when you're using EC, you get a lot better performance that way anyway. So since the SIP, we started classes the Monday after we let out, which I think we let out on a Thursday. We started classes on Monday, and our teachers transitioned. We'd had a identity management system in place for the last 6 years that was a bear to put in, but we use it for everything from our copiers to coming in our doors. So all the kids know their IDs, they know how to log into the wireless, they know how to do all the different things. Our campuses have had border-to-border Wi-Fi since our last update, and we were able to do that under E-rate simply by redefining our spaces, which we defined all of them as learning spaces, and we were able to document it to the degree that it was approved. So we actually probably bleed into the neighborhoods. I'm not really going to say more about that, but we're now working with the city libraries to mesh to them and help them. We've helped 2 of our more remote fire departments have better access for calls and that kind of stuff. So the results we've seen since SIP have been, pretty good. Like, we've all missed a beat in terms of, we have kids that we have to chase down and call and make sure that they're getting on and so forth. But overall, we were kind of ready. I mean, we're as ready as you could be for something like this. And like Eric, I guess I'd echo, I don't see this as scary or something to be feared. I see this as the next iteration of American education, and we need to really pick out the future that we really want. As Robert mentioned, some teachers weren't doing things online, and they weren't as engaged as they could have been. And now they are. So yay, anyone who wasn't signed up for stuff, boy, they're signed up now. So this is a great opportunity to use this as the lever to make the change that we really want to have for our kids.
That's great. And we're sort of hearing that all over the place, people taking advantage of this opportunity to get everyone on board, but also make some major changes in terms of acknowledging that this flexible mobile reality is here for good. Robin, I want to come back to you, and I apologize. I think I'm supposed to correct your title on this particular slide. I might have corrected it on the other one, but not this one. And you're director of instructional technology. Am I correct? So you sort of fit in that middle space between both areas, and that's a unique arena to sort of straddle what's going on in instruction and what's going on in technology at the same time. Really, what do you see happening down the road? I mean, what are you doing in the fall going forward?
Going forward, I mean, if I can just jump back for just a second too, regarding the funding issue and what Randy had mentioned about bonding, et cetera, we did a bond as well for our technology. And that was, I believe, our community, the city of Buckeye and the greater Buckeye Valley at that point. They, in particular, were the true innovators and voted yes for that, because it is the one-to-one program and getting that technology into the hands of the students that basically put us ahead, slightly ahead of this crazy quarantine issue. So more community support given to technology and education, I think, is going to be the key going forward, something that we should have a takeaway from all of this. And then for us in particular, as far as education and in the classroom, I mentioned previously that we kind of had a handle on the devices, the product was there, Teams was integrated. We even had online curriculum purchased and licensed, but we hadn't, from a top-down level, kind of mandated that teachers be using this on a daily basis. So it was a little bit more flexible. They could use it if they wanted to, kind of like a textbook, as a superintendent used to refer to it as. Some people use the textbook more than others. Some people use technology more than others. But I think what this has brought forward, and from his standpoint, is going to be that he's going to mandate that to a percentage, if it's 10% or 20% of your daytime classroom schedule is going to be something related to online, so that we're all familiar and better prepared should this kind of quarantine or another situation occur. But also just to be utilizing the devices and the technology that we have in the classroom.
Yeah, so you're definitely making a transition. Your superintendent's leading a move to more and more and more digital.
Yeah, and recognition of that is coming forth, obviously, and not the lack of use, but just a little bit more of a relaxed implementation. I think he's going to take a little different stance on that at this point and say that a little bit of a mandate is going to happen, and follow up to find out that teachers are using their devices. They do know how to get into Teams, or if we have this online curriculum already purchased and available, they start building that out and using that on a digital platform.
Mm-hmm. I've seen him lead. I've watched him do it, and he's really good at it. So yeah, I agree that that's really what's going to happen. So I think what we want to do now is sort of take a look at some of the questions. Erik, some of them are really best fielded by you. Well, Brendan Tanner's asked quite a few questions. Go ahead and ask what you want to ask of the panel.
All right. First of all, I'm Brendan Tanner. I'm a choir director in Prince George's County Public Schools. We're one of the 25 largest school districts in the nation. We serve nearly 150,000 students and have nearly 20,000 employees. We're looking at equitable access from a different standpoint than a lot of other school systems are. This is just an observation as I ask this question. As a racially monochromatic panel, how do you address cultural and racial bias with validity as we work toward equitable access?
I'll jump in and take a quick try at it. First, I will focus on the term equitable, right? So we have to be first aware of what are the needs levels. The idea around digital equity is providing whatever someone needs to have access, right? So this is different than equal or equality. And I think that this plays into the same issues around poverty, right? Socioeconomics, poverty, race, diversity. There tend to be themes among those topics where we'll see certain populations maybe have a greater percentage of that population is in the poverty group or the lower socioeconomic group, right? And so from my own perspective, I try to look at it as providing any student or their family the supports that they need to have access to the achievement levels that everyone deserves to have, right? So in that case, it may mean providing certain communities more resources and others maybe not so much. So it's really trying to look at it based on the lens of need. There's also, from what I learned in my time in San Francisco, we translate all documents. We had a policy that we translate all documents into 23 different languages. That includes all board documents. There's a huge burden to doing that, but we accept that burden because we believe that it is the right thing to do in supporting every one of those communities. And so we do have to pay attention, because what we found is that different approaches may have not just socioeconomic impacts, but also cultural impacts. And so engaging not only as an IT or technology leader, but engaging with the other members of your organization, right? There's no one person who knows everything. And I'll be the first to say that I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I don't know a lot about any one thing more than anyone else. And so I think the key is making sure that you are collaborating with your counterparts who have other areas of expertise and can bring the perspectives to the table to ensure that you're being sensitive to all of the issues that you just described. And I'll see, I'm sure Randy and Robert perhaps have additional perspective on that.
Yeah, and we also have additional questions. Robert, if you want to address, please say so, or Eric. Otherwise, I'm going to pull up another question here. Okay, I'm taking that as consent. Gene Perkins, you asked a question about the bus. Gene, you're unmuted now.
I'm Gene Perkins. We live in the uppermost rural part of California in the northeast corner. And so we have situations where we're looking at putting Wi-Fi on the buses, but the reality is most of the time those families live a mile, 2 miles away from each other, in many respects, kind of like the rural farmland. So I'm looking for some suggestions on how to leverage that in order to be able to make the best use of that.
Eric, do you want to address that for Gene?
Sure. So I live in Northern California as well. I live in the foothills in an area called Grass Valley. I don't see a house from my house, so I'm familiar with the scenario that you're kind of describing, maybe not to that extent. So, first and foremost, there's not going to be one solution as much as everybody's looking for a silver bullet, right? I think school buses and mobile hotspots play a role. So in terms of suggestions on how you use that, what we've been seeing are a couple different ways of doing it. One, you either put the bus in a place of the highest density or a centralized location where you think people can get to. So you might even put that in a shopping center parking lot that is where all of these other folks are going to come to for a period of the day. Or the alternative that we've seen is that bus will drive and be at a different location for an hour to 2 hours at a time, right? So you're either distributing and making it a mobile hotspot that moves around throughout the day, or you're putting it in a centralized location. I mean, I know these sound like fairly obvious, but given the limitations of it being one single mobile bus with Wi-Fi on it, I think those are the two basic approaches that you can take, is putting it in multiple locations throughout a day, or putting it in one location that you think offers the most access to the people in the area.
Gene, how many students are you trying to serve on this?
Well, in that particular concentration, we're actually a very small. We only have about 750 students, but we're probably trying.
What's the number of students you're trying to reach?
We're probably trying to reach about 75 to 100, somewhere in that range.
You know what might work for you, and I'm assuming this is the terrain is pretty up and down.
Yeah, it's in a valley, so
good.
There are spots where you can't see some of the mountains where they have the cell towers at, but by far and large, most of the places have access.
Well, a couple of options that I've seen people use pretty effectively are work with balloons, where essentially they tether a balloon up at the highest point if they don't have high spots, especially in plains areas. And they basically along with the wire that goes up with the balloon. They have a couple of access points, and they bury the valley with access. I would, I don't think MiFis are going to work for you, and I don't think the bus thing's really going to work either. The only other thing I would do, who's your telephone provider?
We have, as far as the cell phone providers,
Your landline?
Frontier.
Frontier, great. That's actually really great. I worked with Frontier in a rural part of San Benito County, and we were able to get DSL down the main highway for the folks with all the ranches along the way. And we served, it's not a huge number, we served like 93 people. They all had DSL. Doesn't totally give them YouTube all the time, but they could definitely do their homework. I would talk to Frontier about that. That's a very viable option.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gene. I want to come back to our panelists for final thoughts here on what you see happening in the future. And I also want to bring up for all of you, some of the districts that we've talked to as Learning Council on the East Coast, they can have issues like the schools on one side of a bay, body of water, and then there's no cell towers on the other side where there's sort of, remote living, but it's not that far in miles, it's just over a big body of water. So we've had districts talk to us about having to stand up their own towers or become their own ISPs. So any thoughts on the future or what I just talked about with regards to ISPs and towers?
Sure. So just simply as from my perspective as part of CommScope as a company, they do global telecommunications. And what's really cool is that they provide everything from copper to fiber to cell tower technology, the radios on the cell tower, so LTE, all the power options, everything you see there, to the cabling that goes into your businesses, your local city, as well as all the way to your home. So, the cable box in most homes, if you look at it on the back, was made by a company called Eris. Well, Eris happens to be part of CommScope as well. And Ruckus Networks provides the Wi-Fi that Randy was talking about in Eastside Union High School District. So the thing is that there's all these different technologies that you can use for the situation that Leilani just described here, where, there may be a bay separating two parts, two communities. There's point-to-point technologies. I'm really optimistic that there are so many different great technologies out there that are helping solve these gaps, both wired and wireless, that you'd be hard pressed to find a scenario that there isn't a solution. Like, Randy just described a balloon, right? And it sounds, to some people, they think it might sound far-fetched, but the reality is, as he described, there are people doing this, right? There are solutions to do this. And it's just a matter of finding the right bits and pieces that you put together to solve it. You may be familiar that Wi-Fi 6 is currently out. Well, the FCC just approved 6E, new spectrum that is really going to change our performance and capacity for connectivity. And those changes keep coming. We see SpaceX as well, right? Low orbit satellites. It's pretty exciting. And that stuff is just going to keep coming. So work with your trusted partners who can help put things like these together, because the solutions are there.
Great, thank you. Robert, final words.
So yeah, to wrap that up a little bit with the future, and of course, curriculum-wise, moving to a digital curriculum is going to be beneficial. But I think looking at relationships and resources, like Randy and Eric were mentioning, we had a vendor come to us, cell tower, quote unquote, but they were really cell sites. And we are currently working with some local, say, fire stations, rural fire stations, where they want to put a tower. It's actually just an antenna on a building, so it's much cheaper than a tower. But this is from a local resource provider for bandwidth, the backhaul bandwidth to his network and on our network then at that point. So working with businesses like that, and then reaching out to the community, if it's fire stations or even local businesses, a little mom and pop store, a rural store, they might allow to add an antenna to their site, which allows further reach for the network. So we're working some of those kind of angles for the future as well.
Great. Okay, good. Randy.
To encapsulate it, I guess the biggest thing is, fear strikes out. Don't be afraid. Like, what's the worst that could happen? Our motto is that failure is completely and totally an option in the things that we try. And when you see the great innovators, you see a lot of failure before they had success. We made a lot of friends, and we listened to a lot of people who are really smart, and then we make a choice that makes sense. If your local guy is telling you that, oh, the only route is this or that or the other thing, I would stop listening to that local guy too much. I would do what you're doing right now, which is listening to some people who weren't afraid, and they go out and they try to do some things that are going to be great for kids. As it relates to the equity question, the only thing I would give is that we all grow up in our own circumstances, and none of us know each other, and we don't know where we came from or what our families look like or what our staffs look like or who we actually are. What I would say is my whole life has been dedicated to helping people. Teaching in Eastern Kentucky for 5 years, and then having a long career at AWOL, and then retiring and coming to the East Side to see what a new superintendent and I could do for the kids of the East Side who I had come to know. I think the only thing you can do is get up every morning and maybe not worry so much about politics and policy. I watch 30 minutes of the news every day, but the rest of the time I go to work for our kids, and I try to deliver for our teachers and for our kids the very best possible opportunities. Because for me, I really got lucky. I got a couple of opportunities along the way from people I never would have expected to get them from, and it allowed me to change my life. And that's what I want for all the kids who I've ever worked with, is just to give them the opportunity to change their life and shape it in a way that they really can respect and feel good about as they move through this life that we get. With learning and teaching and communities, the biggest opportunity that this particular situation that we're in today, with all the multitude of things going on, is it's a great time to make relationships and deepen them and bring people in and share your problems and help with the solutions, and everyone pick up a shovel and start digging, because we have a lot of work to do. And education wasn't succeeding as it was. We kept innovating and innovating and innovating and adding things and working on things, and you'd see pockets of excellence. But we don't need pockets, we need waves of it. We need everyone to get a shot. And so this is the opportunity to reshape all of this, to make this more fair, to level things out, to give everybody a chance. And, I want to be part of that.
Thank you for that. Okay, thank all of you for joining us today and for having this discussion about deploying distance learning solutions for access equity, those two new ways, but also for the final message Randy just gave, and I know is implied by Robert and Eric and everyone attending, and that is part of equity is caring about what's going on and caring about every single one of the kids. And no matter where they're from or how far out they are from your buildings or what neighborhood they hail from, it's caring. So I'm delighted to have all of you join us, because it shows that you care and that you're out there somewhere in America today doing something about it. And thank you for that. So I'm going to be ending this webinar here. Hopefully have you again on some of the other webinars coming up. Thank you again for joining, and goodbye.